You've probably heard of Tokyo Rose, but only as a mysterious, alluring woman heard over the radio in a World War II movie. Tokyo Rose 0 Hour is a new graphic novel by Andre Frattino and Kate Kasenow that fills us in on Iva Toguri, a Japanese-American woman who, under very odd circumstances, found herself working at Radio Tokyo during the war. How and why did she end up broadcasting Japanese propaganda to the Allied forces in the Pacific? This time, Kumar and I review the graphic novel and the answers it reveals. First, if you appreciate the work we do on Deconstructing Comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons, chipping in at least $4 a month. Coming soon, we discuss the first John Romita issue. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Kumar in Melbourne. Gee, we're always talking about how long it's been since the last time, but that Peanuts episode was not very long ago at all. So I'm finally planning to move, as I was just telling him, so I'm not sure how that's going to affect the release of this.
You're moving that soon?
Yeah, I mean, nothing solid yet, but
okay.
It could be within November, theoretically.
Wow, okay.
So we'll see. But I'm tempted to delay it into December after school ends. It would be a lot easier to deal with, I think. But anyway, we're not talking about moving today. We're talking about a book called Tokyo Rose 0 Hour, story by Andre Frattino, illustrated by Kate Kasenow, lettering by Janice Chang, she did a lot of Marvel work in the past, lettering. Right. Now, how did you know about this book? You had like a not quite final PDF of it.
Andre Frattino reached out to me on Twitter. I don't know who he is. But through some chain of connections, somebody suggested he should get a hold of me as a person to possibly review this. So he sent me this PDF, which was pre-release. It's not like the final. It's not the final edit of the book.
Well, I certainly hope not, because I sure found a lot that I wanted to edit. I wanted.
Well, let me tell you. So I read about 20 pages of it. And I was like, gee, there's a lot of lettering errors. And it was like balloon tails pointing to the wrong person, or in the wrong panel, or the wrong balloon shape. And about 20 pages in or so, I was like, okay, there's a couple of errors, fine. I kept reading, and they just kept coming. And then I finally texted the guy on Twitter again, and I was like, is this the final version of the book? And he's like, no, there was a. He said even the second printing, they caught another typo, like another error that they fixed for the most recent edition. So, it's not that, because I almost felt like backing out.
Yeah, it's the story of Iva Toguri, and did you notice in the intro, I think Janice Chang intro, the first time she's mentioned, it says Iva Yoguri, with a Y instead of a T,
Yeah.
I didn't catch it the first time because I was just starting the book, but the second time...
I did notice the first time, because then she mentioned something about the Toguris later down the page. I was like, wait, is this the same person? Because I had no idea about this person or this story, which is, kind of the interesting thing about it, which I guess we'll talk about all that stuff.
Right,
but definitely. I'm assuming that's one of the things that was caught in the later printing.
I hope so. Yeah, the scene on the ship with Iva and the other Japanese woman, the balloon tails were all mixed up, and I couldn't tell which one was Iva. She kept talking to herself.
Yes.
But anyway, so who is Iva Toguri? So listeners, even if you don't know who she is, you probably heard of Tokyo Rose, a name applied to basically any of the women who were on the Japanese English language propaganda radio station during World War II. But this is the story of how she ended up doing that and then what resulted from that. This is all new to me.
I guess she must have been the most famous of them, maybe most notorious, because she came forward. I guess we'll talk about all this stuff, but she came forward and she got labeled Tokyo Rose, even though she never called herself Tokyo Rose. But I guess she's the person that's most associated with it. I wonder if the others are still anonymous or what. Right.
Well, yeah, and you can kind of see in the book the reasons why the others are more anonymous, because they passed on getting any recognition because they figured correctly that there'd be a backlash.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iva Toguri, she was born in America. She considered herself. It's very clear from the book. It's stated again and again. She considers herself an American, not a Japanese.
Yeah.
And I think she lives in California at the beginning, or she mentioned San Diego at one point.
Yes, San Diego, yes.
And some relatives in Japan need help because their son is training in the army and their aunt is sick. And so she is sent by her family over to Japan to help out. So I was, in my notes, I called it visiting relatives, but that makes it sound much more pleasant than it looks in the book.
No, it's really,
because the aunt doesn't really like her, and it's like work all day and night.
Yeah,
practically. So she's getting ready to leave, and then there's a delay. You won't go into that too much. It's all explained in the book, but then while she's in this delay waiting for documents she needs, then Pearl Harbor happens.
Yeah.
And now it's basically impossible for her to get out.
Yeah, literally the same day she's supposed to sail out, December 7th.
Mm-hmm. Well, except I was a little stuck on that because Pearl Harbor Day in America is December 7th, but it was December 8th in Japan when that happened.
Right. Okay, right.
So I wasn't sure if they were accounting for that. It didn't feel like it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know, but there's a lot of moments, like the fact that she's born on the 4th of July. Mm-hmm. That's her birthday. But there are certain events that happen, like her husband proposed, the man who ends up proposing to her, proposes during an air raid.
Yeah, as the Allies have reached Tokyo.
Yeah, maybe for the first time. It seems like it hasn't happened before.
Seems to be, yeah.
But there are some kind of shocking moments of could these dates be right kind of moments? But they seem to all line up. It's all very dramatic. Like, it's kind of a good choice of subject because it's almost hard to believe some of these. They've chosen the right moments of coincidence, let's say, for certain things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, after watching Bohemian Rhapsody, I hardly trust bios at all anymore.
Right.
But I've already talked about that in the podcast.
I would say, I haven't seen that, but I think that's true of almost every biographical work, but I will say that this is one where, like, there's a timeline at the back, and it lines up with the timeline. He in the beginning, he says, Andre's introduction, he writes that he didn't have to make up much or fudge much for dramatic purposes. There is some stuff that I feel like was fudged, but I feel like it was mostly because a lot of the stuff that happens to her that's really dramatic is out of her hands. Like, it's stuff that she's not in control of, like when people are betraying her or whatever. So there's not really a need to make up stuff to make her seem heroic, because she's I don't want to say passive, but like, things happen to her, rather. She's kind of trapped a lot of the time in her situation. So it doesn't seem like you'd have to make you don't have to make that up. There's nothing there to make up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's kind of stuck in Japan and has a falling out with her relatives, particularly the aunt, who kind of lets her have it.
Yeah.
And, there's suspicion of her among many Japanese because she's a Nisei, she's an American.
Yeah.
And so people feel like they can't trust her or they make fun of her, and the aunt even seems a little suspicious of her. And that she doesn't do any of the housework right either. That's her bigger complaint. So Iva just gives up and moves out and gets an apartment and ends up working for NHK, basically, and particularly this Radio Tokyo that was the propaganda
So
station.
she's already been visited. We should mention she's already been visited by the Thought Police. Mm-hmm. They come to. I can't believe they're called the Thought Police. I thought this was something. I thought George Orwell made up that term, but I guess some countries did have Thought Police. And they're kind of making underhanded threats about they want her to cooperate or whatever. In whatever way they see fit. They want her to renounce her citizenship, I think, at that stage. I can't remember.
Yeah, some guy comes to her and says, we're going to make a deal with you. This will be great for you. You can become Japanese. Just sign some papers. And she's like, but I'm not Japanese. I'm American.
Yeah.
And then there's some words of kind of pressure, and then so we'll let you make a decision. We'll give you some time. But of course, she never changes her mind.
Yeah.
And then, another one of these bits of timing, as it's told in the book anyway, just as she is declaring, I'm not going to forget who I am. I'm sure our boys will make us proud. And she says something like, I'm not Japanese, I'm American, from the land of the free, not some oppressive medieval society where they leave their people no choice, just as they're showing the rest of her family in America being hauled off to the camps.
Yeah. That was a great ironic moment. Obviously, the timing was, I mean, it wasn't like as the moment she was writing the letter this was happening. It was like, obviously, massaged for dramatic effect. But that is, I think, the only moment that was really, and it's weird because there's a page, I think the page before we see them being taken away, put onto the buses to be taken to the internment camps in California. She is writing the letter, and there's this panel with the background is like a waving U.S. flag. Mm-hmm. It gets so over the top, and in this moment, I was like, I can't believe they're handling. She's talking about how she's a true blue American, and she says one point later on how she bleeds red, white, and blue or something. I was like, this is so full on. And I wonder too if some of that was because a lot of this apparently was taken from her own words. And obviously she had to defend herself after what happened later in life, and she had to state how patriotic she was. So obviously she was going to say these things, but I feel like, was she going like too far almost? Like, was this really how she felt? And even at the very end when she's 90, which I think is about, was it like early 2000s?
Well, yeah, it was like 2006-ish.
Yeah, she's still like super. I'm an American through and through, and you can cut this out of the podcast if you want. But is being an American really that great?
For some people, it is.
Yeah, and there seems to be no questioning of it. Even I can kind of understand it pre-war, but 2006, we're talking post-Desert Storm and stuff, and are we really just being blindly, I'm an American, that's the best thing there is? Yeah. Well. So I don't know. Anyway, this is my feeling was this is how she talked about herself in interviews or whatever, when people talk to her about, or maybe they've got her letters. I don't know. Maybe she really did write about herself this way, but But that moment, I did like that ironic timing of that moment for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then we see how a couple of POWs were tasked with writing the propaganda in English, and they decide to have it done in a way that it's kind of winking at the Allied troops, so that it kind of won't be almost like it's kind of a satire of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also kind of think, so it's, they've got this Australian guy and another guy who's Filipino, maybe?
Yeah.
He seems to be in the Philippines Army, they mentioned later on, Reyes. Ironic thing is, if you had a story about somebody who was in radio, I think comics would be the worst possible choice of medium to tell them. But I'm very glad for this book, actually, because as I said before, I'd never heard of this person, and I'm not, even if I picked up a prose book about Tokyo Rose, about Iva Toguri, and read the back cover blurb, I probably still wouldn't read it. But it's a comic, so I'm reading it, so I'm glad it's in this medium. But it's such an odd choice, because sometimes they talk about how her tone, it was something about her tone that the Japanese wouldn't pick up, but the Americans or the Australians listening or whoever the Allied forces would pick up and understand that there was a bit of a wink there, and that was actually boosting morale. But for me, it was hard to tell reading it. What's the thing she's saying, or what is her tone of voice that's actually the giveaway? That
Yeah, well, I got so kind of frustrated on that point that I looked on YouTube and found there's a video there of her, saying some of these things as she would on the air. Okay. And I'll link to that in the show notes, because it's kind of, it's helpful in understanding the book, I think. And she does sound, as the POW says, I can't remember the Australian guy's name now.
It was, oh my God, I can't remember. I read his name 100 times. It was Collins,
right.
Or it was.
I'm scrolling for it here, but he says that she's supposed to be like the girl next door.
Yes.
And so he keeps getting asked. She's described
as having a husky voice. I think.
He keeps getting asked, why did he choose her? Because she's not a seasoned professional, and he says that's exactly why. Because I wanted her to sound like the girl next door and not like a seasoned professional.
Right. So you can't really... Because when you read her words, she sounds like reading it sounds like a seasoned professional. In my mind, when I was reading what she was saying, she sounded like a real pro. Like, she sounded like she knew what she was doing. She sounded sassy. She didn't sound like somebody who's kind of uncomfortable reading it or...
Oh, the Aussie guy is Major Cousins.
Cousins.
Yeah, Cousins. Right. Cousens.
Yes.
They recruit. She's working there in the office, and they get her to do the broadcast, and she's refuses at first because it's propaganda and because she has no broadcast experience. But she at first says no, and then when she goes back to her apartment, she finds that the cops are looking around her place, just like a routine check or something, and then she realizes she's not really safe where she is anyway, so she can't put herself in more danger.
Another moment of coincidence, right? Like the same day she's asked by these guys, she says no, goes home. Although it reminded me of the Nichelle Nichols meeting Martin Luther King the day after she said she was going to quit Star Trek to Gene Roddenberry. Then the next night she met MLK and was like, okay, I'll stay on the show. So it reminded me a little bit of that.
We'll remember that for the Nichelle Nichols graphic novel bio, which somebody is sure to do.
So this Radio Tokyo, one of the guys that works there says that it's full of resident maybe that was Felipe, her future husband, says it's full of resident enemies. This was really interesting to me as well. So I'm trying to understand why you would tune into a propaganda station as a U.S. soldier. Why wouldn't you change the channel? Or, obviously there's not a lot of channels out there in the middle of the Pacific, especially broadcasting in English. I guess they were like, well, we'll skip past the propaganda and just ignore it and listen to the music, or what their thinking was. But it was, I would have liked to have known a little bit more about that. But I like the idea that the radio station was full of people that were sympathetic to the Allies anyway. And that it had been populated by the Japanese government with like people that could speak English, and they believed were now on the Japanese side or had been coerced into being on the Japanese side. That was an interesting little detail, yeah. And then, okay, so did you mention that? So then they hire her, right? Or the Cousins recruits her,
right? Yeah.
Initially, he's interesting. He uses the word gullible. He says we need to find some gullible to do this because I think
he doesn't really trust her at first.
Yeah, and I think he knows it's risky because Reyes seems to be worried afterwards. Like, what about what happens to her? And Cousins is like, well, she's a weapon. She's a tool for us.
And everyone's getting used in the war anyway, so we just try to do whatever we can and try to make it home alive.
Yeah, and she has an interesting response, which is, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. That's literally the words that they've given her in this comic. So she's almost in a place of comfortable equilibrium until the raid happens, which is immediately after she delivers this line on her apartment. Yeah, I like that bit too because there's a lot of balancing going on, and I mean it's like the scene with the internment camp bus. I mean, the book is mostly just facts, and I guess a lot of character. We get a lot of character development and facts about what happened to her, but those kinds of moments of what they must have really been thinking, or those delicate balances, those to me were some of the more interesting parts as well. Yeah.
And we didn't really mention, or kind of in passing, but working in the radio station, there's also a Portuguese guy there of Japanese descent.
Yeah, that's Felipe.
Yeah, Felipe, and they eventually end up getting married.
Yes, once he proposes during the air raid.
Right. And the timing there at that point, because the air raid is apparently happening just like within minutes after she's told that she's off the air now, and they're going to have these other women broadcasting as Tokyo Rose instead. So I mean, but I wondered about that because that would have meant that they hardly ever were on the air anyway, and supposedly they were on for months.
Right. I don't know. And part of it is confusing because some of the testimony we get is lies that we are told are lies by people who've been kind of forced into and coached into their testimony by the FBI. That like someone says that there was like a 6-month gap after Cousins has a heart attack and leaves the show, or he's taken away in an ambulance, and then it's like the next day she walks in. But these people, I guess, lie and say that she was there for 6, or the lawyer says she continued working there for 6 more months, and maybe she changed her attitude during those 6 months. So I don't know what are any of those numbers true? Is that 6-month figure true or not? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm looking at the chronology in the back, but it doesn't mention when she was replaced on the radio program.
Right.
Yeah, it just says she started August 20. Well, she started working there August 23rd of 43. She started on the air in November 43, and then it's just, U.S. Marines landed the Japanese-held island of Iwo Jima, February 19th, 1945.
Okay.
So yeah, it doesn't really answer my question.
I guess once the American occupation begins, there's like tons of reporters hanging around in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. And one of them two of them team up and decide that the real stories, or a story that could pay, is about this Tokyo Rose person, or an expose of some sort, an interview, all that kind of stuff.
Well, we're especially shown this Harry Brundage, who worked for a publication called Cosmopolitan, clearly not the same one that is in publication today.
Isn't it?
I don't think so. At least if it is, they've really changed their format.
Oh, yeah, it's possible. I mean, some magazines do change over time. I do wonder if Cosmo...
I guess I didn't actually do any research on it, but...
Maybe 10 Ways to Please Your Man next to Tokyo Rose. It's possible, I guess. Yeah. No, I didn't look it up either, but... I assumed it was Cosmo because the other guy, Clark Lee, is actually working for a newspaper, and Brundage is working for a magazine.
Okay, well, gee, Cosmopolitan goes back to, ready for this? March 1886.
Yeah, I believe it.
So, yeah, maybe it is the same one. It's just, it says it began as a family magazine.
Yeah.
From 1925 to 1952, it was officially titled Hearst's International combined with Cosmopolitan, but was simply referred to as Cosmopolitan.
Okay, yeah.
So, it was under Hearst, and, I guess publishing... Yeah, so I guess it was the same Cosmopolitan, but, I guess it really changed after, like, 1965. Okay, right. So anyway, he worked for Cosmopolitan, but it wasn't How to Please Your Man articles.
Yes. Yeah. So we should also. So they decide to write this article, and they offer a $2,000 reward to interview Tokyo Rose. Whoever Tokyo Rose is, they don't know who it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's when you see the other women saying, "No, we're not going to do that because there could be consequences for." Identifying any of ourselves as Tokyo
and
Rose.
Actually, this moment was a bit confusing for me because as I was reading it very casually this afternoon, was like assumed that was Iva in that scene was that woman. And I was like, it wasn't until the next page when you see her talking about it in a different context that it's like, oh, that was just one of the other girls. Now, I will say that the the art is pretty. It's pretty good. It's cartoony, and I think that, everybody has a different, like Kasenow, everybody has a different face. They're usually pretty easy to tell apart. There's a lot of emotion in the faces. All that stuff was really good, and she can really draw any situation, like even crossing the Pacific on a boat, all that kind of stuff, which would be very difficult to draw. But there was a couple of moments. Like that one specifically, I was like, oh, which one is she? And then it wasn't until the next page I was like, oh, it wasn't any of them.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I didn't trip over that. But
no, because you were paying better attention. I was like, of course she's not living in a room with these four other women. I should have known that.
Yeah, she's living with her husband, and we see she's pregnant.
She's pregnant, yes.
And so... She's thinking,
and they want the reward money.
Yeah, if we can get the $2,000 for doing the interview, then that'll get us back to California, and we'll be there for the baby to be born. Yeah. So it's set up, and she does the interview, and then Brundage finds out Cosmopolitan doesn't want to publish it.
Yes.
More on Tokyo Rose 0 Hour coming up. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko and now Lee and Romita. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange?
So wait a second. So the newspaper article has come out, and the news. So that makes her a bit famous.
Well, yeah, okay. I'm a little stuck on this point because we do see,
So
a
Clark
headline,
Lee, right? So
photo.
Clark Lee wrote this. The deal was that one of the partners, Clark Lee, was going to write a newspaper article, and then there was going to be an interview in Cosmo, which Brundage was going to write.
Okay.
That was the deal, and he was going to get $2,000 out of Cosmo to pay the expense of the feed for the interview to Tokyo Rose, to Iva.
Right. Yeah. I see
the newspaper article comes out with her picture in it.
Both of their names on the byline, Brundage and Lee.
Yeah.
So then she does get some notoriety from that, and then Cosmo says we don't want it, we won't pay, and then he's worried that since she is an American, once they get back to the States, she could sue him because she signed a contract, and
that's right,
and he can't pay now. So then Clark comes up with an idea for how to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. So before we get to that, so I would love to know what was going on in the editor's head, the Cosmo editor's head, because the editor doesn't want an interview with the traitor. It seems, and is like, I'm nixing this article. You're not getting the $2,000. Who wants an article with a traitor? So then they arrest her. She's arrested. So, this is the point you were getting to.
That's Lee's idea. Yeah,
Lee's idea is get her arrested. And again, this is one of the things I actually liked. One of my favorite things in this book was the drama around her fate, that she's being pulled back and forth. That, Pearl Harbor happens, and then she's pulled into this radio program, and all these things are outside of her control. And I like that. And usually that's in drama, that's you're supposed to give your characters agency, and she almost doesn't have any agency. But to me, that was the most dramatic. And because I knew nothing about her, I never knew what was going to happen. I was really kind of on the edge of my seat. A lot of times I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen with the baby? What's going to happen with this and that?
When the jury came into the trial, I was like, wow, what's the verdict going to be? Scrolling down, what did they say?
Yes. I really loved the fact that she was stuck, and I can't help but wonder what I would do if I was stuck. Even stupid situations like when you miss a flight or something, you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? You can really feel that. So, but I wonder. So she gets arrested, and she has the baby. The baby dies immediately. It seems, and then the editor, and then Brundage calls his Cosmo editor. He's like, "Hey, this is the story now," and the editor's still like, "No, you've turned her into." So she's in a country where a lot of people are sympathetic to her, and she's lost the baby. So she's become a sympathetic character, and somehow the editors...
Yeah, and it's kind of makes it your fault because you caused her to lose the baby from the stress.
Yes.
That's how I read it anyway.
Okay, but I'm not sure why the editor didn't want the story. It seems like there's a big story here that would maybe sell some magazines still.
The editor says, I told you to drop that story like soured egg salad, but you didn't. Not only did you get Tokyo Rose arrested in the one place she's got friends, you went and got her unborn child killed. Now she's a sympathetic traitor who lost a baby and has a one-way ticket home. Good going, genius.
I guess the fact that she's a sympathetic traitor, I guess you couldn't run that story the day after the war ended, maybe.
Right, well, as we can see in the trial, there's still a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment. The whole World War II thing hasn't blown over.
Oh, it's immediate. It's like a year after, maybe.
I think the trial's not until 49.
Oh, right. Okay.
But yeah, it's still like the press coverage that we see is really slanted, so to speak, and she's a monster and all that kind of thing.
Yes, and they keep referring to her as an animal when they've got her locked up, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the trial is where I felt like they must have made up a bunch of stuff in the comic. And I'll tell you why. Because as far as I know, and I might be wrong about this completely because I'm not a lawyer, but there's no such thing as surprise witnesses or surprise evidence. Everything has to be declared before the trial or before they're brought into court. But there's like...
Well, didn't you ever watch soaps?
Oh yeah. Well, this is this is how I learned about it. I was like, I think I read an article or something somewhere where it's like, yeah, this doesn't happen. You can't have surprise last minute witnesses. They have to be put on the call, like the list of witnesses, and your evidence has to be, even though you enter evidence into court, it has to be done beforehand.
Well, that's no fun.
No, it is no fun. It's no fun at all. It's boring. It's not dramatic. If they put Cousins' name, Cousins especially, so it's like some of the evidence was like, don't they have to declare this beforehand? I think there was something like that. But then Cousins walks in as a surprise because they didn't think they were going to get any of these witnesses to speak on her behalf. And then he literally, just like on a soap opera, just comes in through the back doors of the courtroom, bursts in with the husband.
Yeah, her attorney's not expecting it.
Yeah, no. Attorney's surprised by it, and they're like, okay, take the stand. And then he's on the stand a minute later and testifying on her behalf. I 100% believe he was there. I 100% believe the words he said. I do not believe that he walked in the courtroom doors and then they were like, shock twist, and then they put him on the stand. I really struggled with that bit.
Well, yeah.
And then she's sentenced to 10 years for one of the... we should mention all the stuff is trumped up by the prosecution, and they've badgered their witnesses.
Yeah, they're just like basically lying in court, these people.
Yeah. And the FBI is apparently... It comes out 20 years later that the FBI has badgered some of these witnesses and coached them into testifying and saying certain things in a certain way. And they've offered citizenship to the major that was in charge of the Radio Tokyo program. It seems in a bit of that moment too was a little bit dramatic. Like he overhears this conversation in the hallway where they're just openly speaking about it. Mm-hmm. So she ends up getting 10 years on one count, which was really obviously false. And the judge would not allow the tapes of her actual speeches, her recordings, to be played in court, which is a real shocking moment as well. So she ends up serving 6 years of it. We should mention, too, that actually the book opens with the trial. So we know she's going to end up on trial.
Yeah, a bit of the trial we see at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. And we also get right in the beginning, like in the opening pages, she's giving one of her radio programs and her fingers are crossed as she's reading it out. So we know right off the bat how things are going to end up. We know there's going to be a trial down the line. I did not know that she was going to spend 6 years in jail. That was pretty astonishing to me. And then... it's not until then we get a kind of afterword, which is set 57 years later, an epilogue, where she's being given a citizenship award of some sort, and we kind of get at this dinner speech, which is also a bit clumsy to force all this into a speech at a dinner for accepting this award. We get how she went to jail and how she got out, basically, and then there's an actual prose afterward explaining like all the articles that happened and how people took up her cause or whatever. And it was it Ford that pardoned her?
Right. Ford pardoned her on his last day in office, so that would have been January 1977.
Right.
Of course, she was long out of prison by then, of course, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, just now she didn't, he made it so she actually didn't go to jail. It's all been erased.
Yeah. And her husband Felipe, so they were, after the trial, he was forced to leave the country, and they made him sign a document swearing that he would never return. So they never saw each other again.
Yeah, they got divorced.
Although apparently they were in touch, or they were trying still. I think they say as late as 1990 she was trying to get him back in the country, or I think that's somewhere in there maybe in the timeline or something.
Okay.
Some of those details could have been in the comic. I kind of wish there's some background about her girlhood and stuff growing up in the introduction, in the forward, the prose forward, which I kind of wish had been in the comic. I think would have been better fleshed out that way, maybe. But this is something I encountered reading the Eileen Gray book as well, which is a great book about that architect. But there was just a lot of stuff that was left out and was in the timelines and afterwards and stuff that would have been nice to be in there.
Okay. Oh, I'm looking at the timeline. 1980. Iva and
1980,
Felipe
sorry, yeah,
officially
1980.
divorced after repeatedly failing to gain him
Yeah.
access to the U.S. to join her.
Yeah, and as I was talking with this book with my wife over lunch, she was like, "What happened to him?" And I was like, "I don't know. We don't know where he lived, or I don't think it's mentioned."
I would guess Portugal, but yeah, we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I am curious about what happened to his life after. Did he, remarry or anything? Or we don't really.
Yeah.
You never
But,
learn.
I mean, I was struck reading this by how Nisei were considered suspicious on both sides of the Pacific.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That was full on. Yeah. Really sad.
Yeah.
To be stuck, like physically and socially stuck. Yeah.
You can understand the psychology of it on both sides, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, it's because they're not, and on both sides, they're considered not 100% on our side.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's striking.
Yeah. Really sad. I think the book does a good job of really showing how stuck she is on that level. On every level, like that with the Pearl Harbor and with everybody just being against her. It seems like the only people on her side are her fellow "quote unquote" traitors at Radio Tokyo.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, they were all kind of in the same boat, so
Yeah,
makes sense. I mean, they were not all partially Japanese, but
yeah,
they were all working there.
and it ends with some profiles of the authors and profiles of the sensitivity readers and the founding publisher of Tunnel. That's weird. I've never seen that in a book before. That was going real deep on the profiles.
Well, and I wanted to ask the script readers why they missed some of the typos, or because there's some points in this edition of it that are I think not typos, but the writer writing things as they sound. Like where
Yeah.
the lawyer says one in the same rather than one and the same.
Oh yeah, and also when the dad comes in and says you can fight them off like
Custard.
Custard at,
General
at
Custard.
the Alamo, and I was like, oh, is that a malapropism? Like, are we supposed to take the dad as dumb from that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
Is it?
I wasn't sure if that was a malapropism, intentional, or
Is it his goofy patriotism, or yeah?
or is it the writer's error? We don't know.
Because who's the other one that he mentions that was like
Davy Crockett.
Davy Crockett? That was fine. Davy Crockett at the Alamo was fine. Custard at Little Bighorn was like, I don't know. Is this
I
guy?
didn't know they had any pudding there.
Are we supposed to laugh at this guy or what? It was a weird moment for sure. Yeah, there were a few bits like that, but maybe that's all been caught in the final version.
I hope so.
I do. Yeah, I hope so too, because I do recommend it. Because again, like, I mean, that trial was so good. As much as it was, I think, made up. Parts of it were made up. I think it's so topsy-turvy, and you really don't know how it's going to go, and you're really waiting to hear what the Drists say. And it's a story, the story of this woman that we don't really know much about, so put it out there as many media as possible, I say. So I do recommend it, and it's probably better in the final version, I think.
I did want to mention a technique that shows up, I think, just one point in the book where I noticed it, where people are speaking Japanese, and the Japanese is kind of faded out within the word balloon, and then overlapping it is the English translation.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting way to communicate that language is being translated for us.
Yeah, that is really good, yeah. Yeah.
Of course, in order to do that, you have to be able to reproduce the original language there. So they must have had some Japanese speaking and writing consultant there for that.
Yeah, I hope so. I think they must, because everybody's given a credit at the end of the book. So,
to my dog Spot, thank you. Spot was born in 2015, and he likes his water dish, and yeah. No, but yeah, it was an interesting book, and yeah, as one of the prose writers at the beginning or the end mentions, usually Tokyo Rose is just like some mysterious Asian woman in a World War II movie, and there's not really anything about her.
Kind of alluring. Yeah, yeah. And that's covered in the book too, because the Brundage is expecting to meet some kind of vixen.
Yeah.
And she walks in. She's this kind of ordinary girl, American girl. Yeah, American Japanese. Yeah. Interesting stuff.
I'm just noticing that at the end there's a picture of her mugshot.
Yeah.
It says Sugamo Prison. Okay. Wasn't that the one in Ikebukuro? I know I've heard of Sugamo Prison before.
Yeah, Sugamo. It's on the Yamanote line. So that might be right.
Yeah. It's on Wikipedia. Yeah, it was located in the district of Ikebukuro, where Sunshine City is now.
Ah, I've been there many times.
Right, former site of a prison.
Okay, wow, never
now
knew
site
that.
of a planetarium and shopping.
There's an aquarium up there with penguins that look out over the city, yes.
Right.
Crazy, what a world.
Tokyo Rose 0 Hour is published by Tuttle Publishing. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read it and record our critique. Next week, Jason and I critique the 3rd issue of Immortalis, a supernatural story leading up to a battle between heaven and hell. The pitch doesn't draw my attention, but I'm intrigued by the execution. But why did they send us issue 3? We'll talk about all that next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.